I'm Jair Espinosa and this is Metal. There has been a lot of debate lately about grade inflation surrounding the record number of Latin honors in the recent University of the Philippines graduation, which includes a record 305 summa cum laudes. Some people have expressed concern that this represents a degrading of the standards of the university. I'd like to throw a wrench into the debate by asking a radically different question. Should we be giving grades in the first place? Now, I have been quoted in the past as saying that if I could control our education system, the first thing I would do is get rid of grades. And I stand by that. I hated giving grades as a teacher, and I'm sure many teachers feel the same. Grades are the worst invention we have ever come up with in education. Grades are meaningless and destructive. So in this piece, we will talk about why grades are bad for learning, why people say we need grades, and what we can do instead of traditional grading. To administrators, this is a challenge to you to consider what is actually good and bad for your students' education. I hope this gets you to have conversations with the teachers and parents of your school on the path to going gradeless. We all want the best for our students, and I hope to convince you that this is the best we can do for them. Teachers, we all share the frustration of going through the long process of grading exams and papers and then giving a final grade. If you've ever felt uncomfortable about the process of giving grades to learners, this one's for you. So, let's talk about grades. Grades are actually a relatively recent feature of education systems, just over 100 years old. And yet it is so ubiquitous and deeply entrenched that it is hard even for students to imagine school without grades. Yet, for as long as there have been grades, there have been criticisms of grades. It really is time to pay attention to those criticisms. Ang pangunahing silbi ng mga grado sa paaralan ay para pilitin ang mga estudyante na gawin kung ano ang pinapagawa sa kanila. Ito ay paraan lamang ng pagpapatupad ng lumang modelo ng edukasyon kung saan ihinahalin tulad ang paaralan sa isang pabrika at ang pagtuturo ay ang pagpapasa ng impormasyon mula sa guro papunta sa mga estudyante. At pagkatapos ay sinusubok ang galing ng mga mag-aaral sa pagtanda ng mga impormasyon na ito. Sa ganitong sistema, ang pinakamahalaga ay makuha ang tamang sagot at makuha ang pinakamataas na puntos. Sinasabi din natin na ang mga grado ay isang paraan ng pagsukat ng natututunan ng mga estudyante, pero ang totoo, ito ay isang paraan lamang ng pagtatak o pagranggo ng mga estudyante. Hindi ito ang punto ng edukasyon. Hindi trabaho ng mga guro na alamin kung sino ang pinakamagaling at sino ang pinakamahina. Ang magaling na guro ay may pakialam kung lahat ng estudyante nila ay natututo. There have been many studies that document the effects of grades on learning, and most of them are negative. Educator Alfie Kohn wrote extensively about these effects. Let's talk about them. First, grades are a distraction from learning. Ang mga grado ay nakakagulo sa pagkatuto. In school, we tell our students that their grades will determine where they study and where they work in the future. We also use grades as basis to hand out rewards at the end of the year. It's no surprise that students then learn to focus on their grades. Alfie Kohn writes, "Grading for learning is like bombing for peace." Several studies have shown that the grade orientation is negatively associated with the learning orientation. That is, the more students focus on their grades, the less they focus on learning. As a result, students perform worse academically when they are focused on their grades. Studies have consistently found that extrinsic motivation, like getting high grades, undermines intrinsic motivation, like acquiring knowledge and mastering skills. In other words, students become less interested in learning because of grades, In this scenario, learning becomes an unintended consequence of the pursuit of grades. Binibigyan ng mga grado ang mga estudyante ng ibang pakay bukod sa matuto at madalas mas pinagtutuunan nila ito ng pansin. Kung mas pagtuunan nila ng pansin ang gaano sila kagaling sa isang bagay, mas lalong hindi nila papansinin ang bagay na kanilang ginagawa. Sa ganitong paraan, nagkakaroon ng mga batang tila magaling sa mga exam dahil maraming kinabisadong mga kaalaman at kaparaanan, pero hindi naman nila naiintindihan ang mga alam nila. Second, grades make students avoid difficult tasks. Ang mga grado ay nagtutulak sa mga estudyante na iwasan ang mahihirap na gawain. Kung matutunan ng estudyante na ang pagkamit ng mataas na marka ang mahalaga, ituturing nila ang bawat ipapagawa sa kanila bilang pagsubok o hadlang imbis na pagkakataon para matuto. Kung grado lang ang mahalaga, natural at praktikal lang na hangarin ng mga estudyante ang pinakamadaling paraan para makakuha ng pinakamataas na marka. Kaya kung papipiliin sila, iiwasan nila ang mga mas mahihirap na gawain. Nakikita natin ito halimbawa sa kolehiyo kung saan umiiwas ang mga estudyante sa mga subject na maraming bumabagsak o sa mga guro na may reputasyon na mahirap magpa-exam o mababa magbigay ng grado. Aiming solely for a grade sees students do the bare minimum to get those grades. They very rarely will do anything that isn't explicitly required to do. Moreover, students will not risk doing anything that could possibly lower their grade. So, this is how the thought process shifts from what can I do that I can learn from the most to what's the easiest I can do to get the highest grade. And if earning a particular grade is the only thing that matters, then any means to get that grade are valid, including taking shortcuts and cheating. Cheating is a direct consequence of a focus on grades. Third, grades tend to reduce the quality of students' thinking. Binababa ng mga grado ang kalidad ng pag-iisip ng mga estudyante. Dahil mas mahirap na mag-isip ng malalim kaysa sa magkabisado lang, tinatanggihan ng mga estudyante ang mga pagkakataon na siyasatin at saliksikin ng mas makabuluhan ang kanilang mga aralin. Imbis na magtanong sila kung totoo ba ang tinuturo sa kanila, tinatanggap na lang nila ito at kinakabisado. Hindi na nila hinahagilap ang mga ibig sabihin ng tinuturo sa kanila, ang kasaysayan, saysay, implikasyon at koneksyon nito sa ibang mga kaalaman. Ang pinapahalagahan na lang nila ay kung ano ang tamang sagot sa mga itatanong sa exam. Alficone cites several studies by Ruth Butler that found that students who received numerical grades were noticeably less creative than those who received qualitative comments without grades. The more the task required creative thinking, in fact, the worse the performance of students who knew they were going to be graded. Students performed best when they were given feedback without a corresponding grade. When students were given comments alongside grades, they mostly ignored the comments and focused on the grade. Also, grades can reduce the quality of teachers' teaching. When a teacher is judged according to their students' performance on tests, they may have no choice but to teach to the test. This results in spoon-feeding facts and procedures, which the students in turn memorize in order to regurgitate during the exam. There will be much less questioning and exploration and investigations. Fourth, despite our best efforts, grades aren't actually very fair or objective. Hindi laging makatarungan ang pagbibigay ng grado. Different teachers grade with varying allocations toward tests, homework, quizzes, class participation, attendance, projects, papers, extra credit, even behavior. So a grade of, say, 90 from one teacher doesn't mean the same as a grade of 90 from another teacher. Studies have shown that different teachers are likely to give the same student output different grades. In fact, Teachers are likely to give different grades to the same piece of work if they see it at different times. Studies have shown that this is true for both humanities and STEM subjects. Mas mahalaga pa dito, hindi nakikita sa mga grado ang pribilehyo. Hindi lahat ng nag-aaral ay may maayos na internet sa bahay. Hindi lahat ng nag-aaral kayang magbayad ng private tutor. Hindi lahat kayang bumili ng libro. May ilan na nag-aaral sa mga paaralan kung saan hindi sapat ang kanilang natututunan. May mga nahihirapan sa ibang lengguwahe. May ilan na nagtatrabaho o may kailangan pang gawin sa bahay bago makapag-aaral. May mga mabagal matuto. May mga nag-aalala sa problema sa pamilya. Karaniwang mas mababa ang nakukuhang marka ng mga taong ito sa paaralan. Kapag binuod natin ang lahat ng yan sa isang numero lang, binabaliwala natin ang kanilang mga kwento at pinagdadaanan. School does not happen in a vacuum. Students don't start at the same place or have the same experiences or have the same goals. And yet, we still think we can teach them all the same things in the same way and then evaluate them according to the same standards. How can we possibly reduce the incredibly complex process of learning and the complications of living life into a single number? Fifth, grades distort students' relationship with their teachers and their fellow students. Ang grado ay nakakasira ng relasyon sa pagitan ng estudyante at guro at sa kanilang kapwa estudyante. When students view their teachers as the grade giver, they make teachers as a judge and executioner of their lives. Teachers control their fates, whether they pass the class, whether they graduate on time or with honors, whether they can go to a good college. This can lead to a very superficial relationship between students and teachers, where students only seek to please their teachers and teachers can become mere fault finders. Students can then become anxious about making mistakes because the teacher will penalize them for that. Apektado din ng mga grado kung paano magbigay ng exam ang mga guro. Nagturo na ako noon kasama ang mga guro na naniniwala na kapag lahat ay mataas sa isang exam, hindi maganda ang pagkakagawa nito. Dapat daw may bababa. Sa ganitong pananaw, ginagawang trabaho ng guro na hanapan ng mali ang mga estudyante at ang mga exam ay nagsisilbing patibok. Grades also encourage competition between students instead of cooperation. In a graded environment, the point is to get the highest grade possible, and that usually means defeating other people. This is significant because studies have shown that cooperative environments raise the quality of thinking of the group. Finally, grades can be deceiving. Ang mga grado ay nakakapanlin lang. Para sa maraming estudyante, ang magandang grado ay nagbibigay kasiguruhan na may natutunan sila. Pero mamaya lang ay mapagtatanto nila na wala pala silang alam. Nangyayari ito kahit sa mga honor student na pumapasok ng kolehiyo na naniniwalang handa na sila hanggang sa madiskubre na lang nila na hindi pa sapat ang kanilang alam para sa mga bagong hamon ng universidad. Grades actually don't indicate learning. They indicate compliance. Erica Goldson was a valedictorian in high school who called herself the best slave in her viral valedictory speech. And she's not wrong. Getting good grades just means that you did everything you were told to do, but you probably sacrificed your own interests, passion, and curiosity to do it. Goldson goes on to share her fear regarding her future because she didn't know what she wanted since all she had ever done was what she was told to do. More than this, while grades are terrible motivators, they are excellent demotivators. Ang mababang grado ay hindi nakakagana na mag-aaral ulit. Pag nakakuha ka ng mababang grado, parang gusto mong sumuko. Isang bagsak na grado lang ay sapat na para isipin ng isang estudyante na hindi siya magaling sa isang subject o hindi niya kaya ang isang gawain. Maaaring mapusok pa silang mag-aral sa simula pero kalaunan ay wala na silang gana. Lahat ng estudyante alam ang pakiramdam na para bang ang bobo mo at hindi ka kasing galing ng iyong mga kaklase at kaibigan. Failing grades stick with you. Every time I introduce myself as a math teacher, someone comments, "I failed math. I wasn't very good at math." There are so many people who believe they can't do something because of their grades. Now, I know it's true that some people have excelled and done well in life through graded systems, but this is more in spite of grades than because of them. The vast majority of students are victimized by grades every year because in those systems, not everyone can succeed, and that is by design. It is the grand triumph of graded systems that it is hard to imagine schooling without grades. Education systems are incredibly resistant to change, but they are especially resistant to getting rid of grades. But why do people say we need grades? The most common reason people say why we need to give grades is that if we didn't give grades, students wouldn't do what we ask them to do and won't learn anything. Well, newsflash, teachers. If getting rid of grades means students will no longer take our classes seriously, then two things are true. We're not giving students a good reason to learn our lesson, and we're probably boring. We have to change the way we teach to be more interesting. If grades only serve to coerce students to doing things they don't want to do, this is all the more reason to get rid of grades. Hindi mo pwedeng pilitin ang taong matuto. Natututo lang ang tao kapag gusto nilang matuto. At natututunan ng mga tao ang mga bagay na pumupukaw ng kanilang interes. Hindi gaganahan ang mga estudyante na matuto dahil lang binantaan natin sila na babagsak sila. Kailangan natin silang bigyan ng matinong rason para matuto. Getting rid of grades forces us to change the way we teach. Straight up lectures aren't going to cut it. It forces us to challenge our ideas of what is and isn't important for our students to learn, and to confront our understanding of how and when students learn best. Another common reason people say we need to give grades is because they're needed for college applications. But let's clarify something. We don't give grades because universities require them. Universities require grades because we give grades. If enough schools did away with grades and showed that the quality of learning is higher, then it would require universities to come up with a better, more creative, and likely more meaningful way of evaluating applicants. And some universities around the world are already doing that. For example, the Mastery Transcript Consortium in the US has been working to replace traditional transcripts of grades with a fuller documentation of what students have learned and mastered over the years of schooling. People also say we need grades because we need a way to measure a student's learning and progress. But we don't need grades to track progress. And grades are a terrible way of measuring something that cannot be measured anyway. How do you measure learning? Tests are not enough. Besides, grades aren't actually very informative about learning. Will a student who earns a grade of 85 know what they lack to earn a grade of 90? Is it a matter of actually learning or just missing a requirement? Is the requirement actually necessary? Hindi lahat ng estudyante kailangan magsipag para makakuha ng mataas na grado. Halimbawa, paano mo ipagkukumpara ang dalawang estudyante? Ang isa, mataas ang grado dahil meron na siyang sapat na kaalaman sa mga paksang pinag-uusapan sa klase. Tapos, ang isa, wala pa masyadong alam sa simula pero nagsipag sa pag-aaral at lumago ang kaalaman sa klase. Sa karamihan na pagkakataon, kung pareho lang ang pagpuntos nila sa exam, pareho lang sila ng magiging grado. Mas malala pa ang pagkuha ng average ng mga grado. Kung ang isang estudyante ay magaling sa isang subject pero nahirapan sa ibang subject, siguro pasado lang ang makukuha niya na average grade. Pero paano mo yun ikukumpara sa isang estudyante na hindi masyadong nagsikap at sapat lang ang ginawa sa mga subject at pareho ang nakuhang average grade dun sa una? Paano mo pag-iibahin ang mga yon kung grado lang ang basehan? When it comes to assessing learning, the assessment actually doesn't have to come from the teacher. Students know best when and what they're learning. We could simply ask them and talk to them. That is far more informative than any test and grade will ever be. And some people argue that grades are necessary to maintain a standard among future professionals such as doctors or lawyers. But what people really need in their professions is independence, creativity, and the ability to think critically. And the development of these things are inhibited by grades. As teacher Jesse Stommel writes, I care less that my doctors are graded and more that they've read all the books of Virginia Woolf or Octavia Butler, because that is how they learn to think critically. The most savvy employers no longer use grades as a basis for hiring. They have devised their own processes to evaluate the best candidates. At any rate, it is not our job in school to classify and rank our students. So now, what can teachers do about grades while the education system figures out how to get rid of them? Ungrading is a growing movement as a response to the well-documented negative effects of grades in the education system. It is being practiced in thousands of classrooms from primary to secondary to college levels in both the humanities and STEM subjects. Most teachers who practice ungrading do so in institutions that still require them to turn in a final grade at the end of a term. So, if you are like them and want to shift your practice, you can start by making grades a less central feature of your classrooms. Jesse Stommel, a professor at the University of Denver who has practiced ungrading his entire career, suggests this simple starting point. Start by trusting students. Now, I know that sounds a lot simpler than it is because there is a massive distrust between teachers and their students. Students believe their teachers are enemies who are out to locate all of their flaws and faults, and teachers believe that unless they are forced to learn, students will not want to learn. And yet, in classrooms around the world which have experimented with ungrading, they prove these concerns false every day. So, here's how you can practice ungrading in your classrooms. 1. Don't put number or letter grades on tests, homework, papers, or any other kind of output during the term. Focus instead on meaningful feedback. If we give grades throughout the term, we focus students' attention on the grade instead of what they are learning. Feedback allows students to focus on improving themselves. It also gives more concrete information than any grade can give. We can help them refocus by giving lots of feedback on their work. Talk about what they did well and what they can improve. But as we mentioned earlier, students only pay attention to our comments when they are not accompanied by a grade. 2. Let students repeat and retake assignments and tests for as many times as necessary to learn the lesson or master the skill, or just do the task to a certain standard that you set in cooperation with them. Give them time. In graded environments, grades are used as a threat to get students to follow our timeline. We basically tell our students, if you don't learn these things in the time that I tell you and do the things I tell you to do, something bad will happen to your future. That is not an ideal environment for learning. You can't put a schedule on meaningful learning. Learning is a messy, complicated process that takes time. And learning is supposed to be fun, which is not the same as saying learning should be easy. Pag nagbibigay tayo ng grado, kasalanan ang magkamali. Pero sa totoong buhay, hindi agad natututo ang mga nag-aaral pa lang. Kung gustong matuto ng isang tao, paulit-ulit niya itong ginagawa hanggang sa maintindihan niya. Kaya mali rin na asahan natin sa mga estudyante natin na makuha agad nila ang tinuturo sa kanila. Ang tunay na pagkatuto ay dumadaan sa maraming kabiguan na sinusundan ng minsan maliit na pagsulong. Dapat bigyan din natin ang mga ating mga estudyante ng pagkakataon na matuto sa ganitong paraan. 3. Make students reflect on their learning throughout the term. This can be done through papers or short one-on-one conferences with every student. Grades make students dependent on their teachers to learn and to know if they're making progress. This changes that by giving agency to learners to take charge of their own learning. You can even let students grade their own work by checking them against a set of standards that you negotiate with them. Ang layunin natin ay tulungan ang mga estudyante na alamin ang mga bagay na hindi pa nila naiintindihan, kung ano ang kaya at hindi pa nila kayang gawin, at magtulungan na gumawa ng hakbang para punan ang mga kulang pa sa kanilang kaalaman. Sa ganitong paraan ay makakabuo ang estudyante ng sarili niyang pamantayan ng kahusayan. Gusto nating baguhin ang pananaw ng mga estudyante na imbis na panghinaan ng loob sa kabiguan, ay ganahan sa kanilang maliliit na progreso. Sa ganitong sistema, ang mga kamalian at kapintasan ay pagkakataon lang para matuto. Binibigyang diin nito ang edukasyon bilang tuloy-tuloy na proseso at hindi lang natatapos pag nakakuha na ng grado. Asking students directly is far more informative than any test will ever be to find out what a student knows or has learned in a subject over a given time. This method also allows us to focus on our students' individual needs instead of mass transmission of information. Every student, after all, has different things they need to learn in the moment, and this way we can address them directly. 4. Let students grade themselves by considering their entire body of work throughout the term. By meeting with students individually and discussing their overall performance in the class, we can negotiate with our students the grade they will receive. Students can collect their work for the entire term and present it as a portfolio of their progress. John Hattie's research showed that students' self-assessment and self-reported grades had the largest effect size on achievement. When students are required to think about their own learning and articulate what they understand and what they still need to learn, achievement improves. Now, you can reserve the right to change the grade that students give, but other teachers have testified that they more often than not have to raise the grades students give themselves. There are other alternative grading systems also that you can try, such as contract grading or specifications grading, which will give more agency to the learners in the grading process. I'll put links to these in the comments and description. The number one feedback that teachers get from their students when they do ungrading is that their anxiety is reduced and it allows them to focus on learning. That alone should encourage us to pursue this method of teaching. Looking at the negative effects of traditional grading forces us to confront a very uncomfortable question. What if the problem isn't that students are lazy, entitled, or dishonest? What if the problem is school itself? What if the problem were our curriculum, our pedagogy, the tasks we give, the system of rewards and penalties? Ungrading is a much harder process than our current grading practices, but the trade-off to meaningful learning for our students is very much worth it. In closing, I want to talk to the parents and the kids out there. Parents, please don't put too much into your children's grades or rank in school. Remember, what's important is what they're learning. Talk to your children. Stop asking them about their scores. Instead, ask them what they've learned. Ask them what they're struggling with. This is so much more meaningful than looking at a number and judging your children by it. What's bad for children is not failing a subject. What's bad for them is not learning, and grades actively inhibit that process. To students, let me tell you something that when I learned, freed me to learn as much as I wanted. Your grades are not important. Yeah, that's right. Your grades are not important. In the real world, no one cares about your grades. They become irrelevant as soon as you leave school. No one goes, "Hi, I'm Timothy. My grade in Math 17 was a 1. Oh, you got a 5? I don't think I can be friends with you." Grades are not important. If you're in a school where you are being graded for everything you do, try your best to study to learn. Don't just study to pass. Kung mag-aaral lang kayo para pumasa sa isang exam o subject, makakalimutan nyo agad lahat pagtapos nito at sayang lang ang panahon ninyo. Pero kung sisikapin nyo na intindihin at bigyan ng saysay ang mga tinuturo sa inyo, mas matututunan nyo ito at mas tatatak ito sa inyong isipan at makikita nyo na kusang aayos sa inyong mga grado. So, liberate yourselves from being slaves to the constant pursuit of grades. Choose instead to pursue knowledge. Learn one meaningful thing every day. As a student, it wasn't until I stopped caring about my grades that I got the most out of my education. I wasn't an honor student, but I learned more. It's a much more valuable way to spend your time in school. And most of all, don't let anyone judge you by a number. Huwag niyong hayaan na husgahan kayo nino man base sa isang numero. Patunayan niyo sa kanila at sa inyong sarili na hindi ito limitasyon. Don't let your grade dictate what you can or cannot do. Don't let your grades define you. You are not a number. Learn things. So, teachers, I'm going to leave links to several books and articles you can read about ungrading in the description and the comments. These ideas are not original to me. I'm not just a rogue teacher rebelling against tradition. I'm just telling you what decades of research have told us. Much has been researched and written about the negative effects of grades on learning, and yet they persist for no other reason than because we've been doing it a long time and we lack the imagination to do anything different. I honestly wish I had learned about ungrading earlier. That's why I'm sharing this with you now. Take this with an open mind, and I'm sure you will see it's the best thing to do for our students.